I'm glad we were able to get you on.
Hi, Erin. I'm sorry that took a little while. I could hear you and it just wasn't coming through with the request, but here we are.
We made it through.
We,
I don't know if your nervous system was how it was handling that moment, or was feeling dysregulated or not, but I'm glad I got you on.
our tech is always the one, you know, technology is always the one where you're like, this is going to test my nervous system out. But yes, we made it.
That's right. So you're jumping in from, where are you based?
I'm in Australia, on the east coast of Australia.
Okay, perfect. And you have a really cool background. You're a physiotherapist. You are a founder of the Nervous System School. You have a master class on the nervous system. I mean, I say let's just get right into it, shall we?
Sounds good.
First and foremost, you talk a lot on your page, on your Instagram page, about triggers. And lately, what I've been noticing is just slowing down and noticing what I'm noticing, which is interesting. Rather than like judge it or label it, I try to get curious about it. And the same can be for me an emotion that I've suppressed for a long time. For me, that emotion tends to be anger, because I'm like uncomfortable with it, or I don't know how to handle it, or I'm not really good at navigating it. Can you describe what a trigger is and how can we use it as a guide rather than as like a negative?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's helpful to start out by seeing that our brain and nervous system are not passively just receiving information. They continue to actively shape themselves through what we experience and the environments we're in, and also our relationships. And so what we look at is an area lower down in the brain called the survival brain. It stores memories of what happens to us without networks related to time. So when sensory information from my body comes in about how I feel, or if it's information around us outside, whether it's what we see, what we smell, what we hear, maybe even what somebody says to us, that information first is processed in the lower centers of our brain. And the brain it generalizes, and it's also an anticipation machine. So it compares that information through what we've experienced in our past. So if something feels familiar, it will automatically, familiar to something that was like traumatic stress, it will automatically send our nervous system into a state of fight, flight, or freeze without necessarily having the time to logically look at what's happening. And, you know, this from a survival point of view makes a lot of sense. It just means today that for some people who've had certain situations that are triggering, it's likely to be a memory from something in the past. Now, this type of memory isn't like recalling something like a holiday that you went on where you know it's from the past. This is to do with our implicit memory system, which is things like knowing that you can ride a bike without having to think about it, drive a car. You just know how to automatically do those things. So yeah, it has to do a lot to do with implicit memory and how that triggers the nervous system.
Right. And the brain is operated in a way or created in a way for us to not have to download so much information, meaning like, yeah, we know how to drive a car. We don't really have to do a lot of thinking, or we know how to ride a bike. But it tends to get in the way when receiving new experiences and trying not to compartmentalize them as trauma. So for people that are tuning in, I have a lot of followers that are in the sports world or in the NFL world, some men, you know, generally more men than women. And I don't know how interested they are in exploring this, because it's kind of under the umbrella of like self-help, wellness, slowing down, you know, not achieving the way we tend to historically achieve in the traditional sense. Where do you start? Like, where do you start with your clients when it comes to being able to put like these past memories or these past traumas and really kind of dissect them and heal from them.
Mm. You made a great point before about being able to see their triggers and being able to observe what's happening. And that's always the first place to get started. So we really need this framework of understanding our nervous system and its responses. Like, so often people say, well, what's the one best tool that I can use to hack my nervous system or to, get my vagus nerve working properly? And there really isn't one go-to quick fix. It's about starting with, okay, I recognize that my nervous system is responding this way. But before we get to that, we just get swept away with it. We're in anxiety and we hear the thoughts that something terrible is going to happen. Or for some people, they go into a state of shutdown withdrawal and they hear the stories of, this is hopeless, it's never going to work out, I may as well give up. So we need the awareness in our body, or what we call interoception, to recognize the bodily signals and sensations. And this is what we can call our eighth sensory system, or our eighth sense. So we need to be able to feel that, but then we still need to be able to see, this is why I might be behaving this way. And I think like our relationships are such a good mirror here, because in one state, I might be more critical, judgmental, start arguments with other people, or, in person or online. And in another state, I might withdraw, shut down, stonewall myself, don't want to, be around people. So the beginning is really getting that framework of understanding of our nervous system, and also learning what true regulation looks like. So, we can use a lot of things to temporarily soothe how we feel, like alcohol, we can use food, we can use social media, lots of different things. And there's, that's not to make ourselves feel bad, but just looking at, if our nervous system doesn't get that true regulation and recovery, then we can spend so much time outside of that and end up with a dysregulated nervous system. And that more looks like long periods of sort of stuck on, where we can't switch off, or long periods stuck on off, where we procrastinate, we have no motivation. But that's really the essence of burnout.
I'm reading a book called Not Nice, and it's been really good, because it's like the people pleaser's guide to not being a people pleaser or whatever. And in it, he describes like boundaries and that sort of thing. But what I thought was really fascinating, which is kind of a little bit what you're talking about, is if you don't understand the discomfort of discomfort, you'll never be able to sit in discomfort. And once you kind of, like you said, give your ability, instead of numbing out, instead of socializing or drinking or escaping this discomforting feeling, if you can just kind of sit in it and label it and understand it, and then you've gotten through it, that is the key to unlocking all the tough times in relationships with people, because there's just going to be discomfort, whether you're going to say something that other person doesn't like, or they're going to say something that you don't like. Being able to really understand what that feeling is, and then sitting in it, rather than what I would tend to do is numb out or escape it or avoid it. It is really helpful. You mentioned burnout. A lot of people, I'm sure, tuning in have had that. I know a lot of my girlfriends go through burnout. One of the things that I definitely feel like I struggle with, my trauma response tends to be freeze. How do I unfreeze? How do I get out of paralysis? Like, is there something that you recommend for people that have freeze or burnout or feel stuck?
Yeah, it might be helpful to look at how that sort of arises first, and then look at the ways that we shift, because I think it's helpful for people to understand where it's actually coming from. When we look at the nervous system as sort of having three states, and we can use Daniel Siegel's window of tolerance as an example, where he talks about the window in the middle is where we're regulated and we have access to, feeling calm, more regulated, our social engagement systems online. So we want to interact with other people. But above that window, where we move more into fight or flight, we can call the sympathetic nervous system. And that's where we'll have more anxiety. It'll be more related to like hypervigilance, anger for some people. But below that window, some people go down into a dorsal vagal state, or a sense of being flat. And it can look like a range of things. So it can look like depression, dissociating from bodily signals where we feel numb. Can be a sense, like the first thing people can recognize is this drop in energy and apathy and a collapse in the body. But when we spend long periods of time in that state below the window, we often can look like burnout. So often if we've spent a long time above the window in that sympathetic state, let's say we've had ongoing stress and we're not recovering. So an example of this looks like I had a lot of patients in 2020 in Australia who they'd just gone through these major bushfires, and then COVID hit, and then it was like their business had issues. So there was never a chance to like come back down. So that system got depleted, and then they just would drop down into this burnout, chronic exhaustion. So burnout essentially is a loss of that sympathetic energy where we get vitality and passion and things like that. But it's also related to low vagal tone, or that our vagus nerve, which brings us into the window where we're regulated, is not working so well because we've spent so much time in a state of being stressed. Now, freeze also fits under that window. It technically belongs to that state. But with freeze, we might feel like we can't take action, like almost like I'm stuck in cement, or I'm not able to move forward. But we can still have all this anxiety going through our system as well. And so working with that, we want to look at, okay, what can we do to bring our energy up, first of all? So we discharge some of that, the dorsal vagal energy, which immobilizes us. And that can come through movement. Like movement is such a wonderful way, although we need to look at, doing it gently and slowly in that stage so that we bring ourselves out rather than jump straight into a spin class or something. Movement can be such a wonderful thing, but really looking at what will restore vagal tone in that moment. Co-regulation. So other people, this is where we can really lean into other people who are regulated, will mean that our inner world will start to mirror theirs. So that's such a resilient superpower to lean into.
Yeah. And that's fascinating. The movement thing is powerful for me because it was the only thing I could do when I lost my dad. I was like, I remember I was at the gym and I was just listening to music and just like bawling. But I really stayed for the most part pretty committed to just going to the gym and feeling like I couldn't see the progress, but I could just see like one step in front of me. And when I tell people who are dealing with grief, like if they can just move in some way, it kind of removes that like pent up hole that you feel in your heart. And it helped me. Say something on your page that's interesting. You believe stress resilience is actually better than stress reduction. Can you elaborate on that?
Yes. You've touched on this, Erin, really beautifully when you said about being able to not sit with the discomfort or those uncomfortable sensations, and that's really important. So if we look at what stress actually is, it's only our nervous system mobilizing us to take action. It's not a terrible thing. We have within us the capacity to have stress come into our system, to meet the demand, recover, and return back to baseline. So if we started here, it's a bit like this, and then we come back. Now, that's okay, but what happens with chronic and traumatic stress is we come up here, and we sort of stay up here. And that's where all of our systems change. But if we're looking at trying to reduce stress and not have anything that creates this response, it's not really, I come from that physiotherapy background and trained a lot of people through injury and all sorts of things. And the nervous system is just the same. So we can train it to be better under pressure, better under stress. And I think if we look at trying to reduce stress from our life, our world just gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And our nervous system gets less and less resilient, adaptable and flexible. So this is where what we want to learn to do is when those stresses hit, when we're outside of our window in either way, we want to learn how we can gently bring ourselves back inside that window of tolerance. And that's where, if we go back to looking at triggers, when we do that, our nervous system learns and it can make those memories that were like fragments or just, it just like noticing that a sensation's like something familiar from our past triggers us. We can often integrate that into a bigger part of our story so that it doesn't set us off anymore. But, you know, stress is not going anywhere. Pain's not going anywhere. That's part of life. And when we learn to have a way to attune or build this partnership with our nervous system when there are stressful things, this is where we actually change those networks in our brain. We can build also more vagal tone as well. There's a particular branch of the vagus nerve that runs from our brain stem down to the heart, and it's been called the vagal brake. And this is a little bit like if you were riding your bicycle downhill, you'd keep just a little bit of that brake engaged with your fingers so you didn't go too fast. Well, the vagal brake's doing that to our heart rate all the time, so keeping us regulated. And when we've got a challenge, it just relaxes a little bit and lets more energy in. It lets this mobilizing energy into our system. So we might feel there's more focus, attention. We've got better reaction time. You know, in terms of performance, if you're talking athletes, this is so important. And then when the stress is over, we would just put the brake back on and slow back down with our physiology. However, if we've been through traumatic stress or just relentless chronic stress, it often means that that brake is not working as well. And instead of just relaxing and letting that mobilizing energy in, it comes off completely. And this is why we move into things like fight, flight, or freeze. So the key to a lot of the work I do is teaching people how can we bring this brake back in and really fine tune it to meet what you're facing, because, you know, optimal performance comes from being able to put the brake on, take the brake off. And we don't want to be calm and relaxed all the time. You know, anger's great. Anger's a healthy emotion if we learn how to listen to it and let it make our decisions going forward. And I think sometimes in the wellness world, there's a little bit of a push that we need to be regulated all the time and calm all the time. And that's just not how it's going to be.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's also really great when you're a parent, right? Being able to have stress resilience. Someone once told me the best advice as a parent, I'm not a parent, but that all you need to do is when your child is feeling dysregulated, just don't die. Just stand there, just be there. Just, you know what I mean? You don't need to label it. You don't need to shame the child. You just need to be there and let the child see that you're okay. So I think even this conversation makes a lot of sense for parents or people that want to be parents, because as a parent, you're going to probably have to deal with a lot of stress. You're going to be facing all of the things, and going to be lack of sleep and all of that. So I find this conversation to be really insightful, and I know I'm very short on time with you. What are your 3 tips for people wanting to take away how to regulate your nervous system? I know breath work's a big thing, but what would be the 3 quick tips for people that want to build stress resilience?
Sure. So I would start with play. Play
Play?
is such a great thing even for adults, yes. So play
Oh,
is essentially letting that break off so the mobilizing energy comes in, but you're doing it combined with feeling safe. So if we've had traumatic stress and we feel like, you know, okay, I don't want to let anything that feels too much for my system come in, there'll be a rigidity and a resistance to it. But play can look like, you know, particularly when it's with other people, it's great because it harnesses again co-regulation and the social engagement system.
mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
and this is going to be unique for everyone. People always say, well, what's play for adults look like? It depends on what gets you excited and feels like fun. So for some
Yeah.
people, it could be surfing, it could be playing with your pet, it could be doing something with your kids, it could be dance, it could be karaoke. So having to think about that, what brings that in, that's a really wonderful thing. Definitely along the lines of movement as well, that will attune to the nervous system. So rather than, you know, just thinking, oh, I feel rubbish, I'm going to try and run this energy out. It's looking like, how can I recognize what's here and move in a way that allows things to not be so stuck? And then finally, the biggest one that we use is what I mentioned before, interoception. And that's learning to read and understand internal bodily signals. It's not an easy thing to do because signals are often a little bit broad and not so clear as, say, sensory information on the skin. But that's really where the science is showing we get the biggest changes to our vagus nerve and to the brain in the areas to do with self-regulation and resilience.
I love it. 3 great tips, and my favorite one was play, because we as adults, we start to get away from that. We forget, and it really is so healing when you can even just remember what were the things when I was young that I loved doing. I do pickleball now. I play pickleball. It's like so fun. Really any kind of sport recreationally, kickball is amazing. Just anything where you can sort of be silly and like you said, be in a safe space with other people who want to join in on the fun. So you're fabulous. Thank you so much for taking the time. I'm glad we ended up making it work. I was really looking forward to this conversation because I think a lot of us are sort of going through an awakening or a deeper understanding of who they were and wanting to feel better. So I appreciate you, and thank you for your time, Jessica. We'll do all the links and tag you and everything. And yeah, I really appreciate your insight today.
Thank you, Erin. Thank you so much for having me. It's been lots of fun.
Amazing. All right, guys. Thanks, everybody. Happy Wednesday.